Thank you very much, Dean Rashmi, and I'm delighted to see that there's a chairman of the chemistry department who's a woman. That's terrific. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you today. I would like to start by saying that we live today in a highly destabilized world. We're currently undergoing two pandemics simultaneously, one that has altered all of our lives globally, COVID-19, and the other plods along mercilessly in the lesser developed, but silently, lesser developed countries, but silently for us in the developed world, namely cholera. The seventh pandemic of cholera is in progress with about 1.9, almost 2 million cases every year and thousands of deaths. So in this past week, we have seen the entire world reset, the order of the world reset. Our world will never be the same after Putin's ruthless and barbaric invasion of Ukraine. Now, what all these cataclysmic events make abundantly clear is that diversity, equity, and justice are vital to social stability, national security, and economic strength. All of human talent, all of human ingenuity and creativity are desperately needed. It's no longer, if it ever was, sufficient to depend on less than half of the half, maybe around 25% of human talent, if we're to survive the pandemics, the wars, the climate change challenges of the 21st century. So what I would like to, does this slides work, or how shall I'll need assistance from a technical, usually a 15-year-old, but that's okay, I think. Okay. Still not working. Technology, it's wonderful when it works. Very good. Terrific. Well, with that interval, that technological interval, today I'm going to, sure. I'm told this is the first time that there's been a hybrid presentation in this room, so that's why all of the things are being put together. Today I'm going to talk about the missing 75% that includes women and the underrepresented. And I'm going to tell a few of their stories just to give examples of the path forward for all of the rest of this missing from the talent that's needed in the 21st century. So I'll discuss really some women pioneers in science and the role of women in science and engineering workforce today. And then I'll give some suggestions of what could be used to win the game, so to speak. Now, starting first with Galileo, that's a pretty good place to start. Actually, what very few people knew was that Galileo's daughter actually did most of the calculations. She did not marry, she joined a nunnery, and there she was able to put all of her efforts, her mathematical talents, to assist her father in his fantastic astronomy work that he did. And then we were very fortunate 2 years ago that for the very first time, 2 women won the Chemistry Nobel Prize together. Their work allows for laser sharp snips in long strings of DNA to be arranged. And it permits researchers to precisely edit specific genes and remove errors that lead to disease. And so when asked about the significance of 2 women winning the Nobel Prize, Charpentier said that while she considers herself first and foremost a scientist, she hoped it would encourage other women. And so that is a very interesting beginning to the point that between 1901 and 2020, a total of 628 Nobel Prizes in science have been awarded. This is just science. 54 went to 53 women, less than 12% of a total number of prizes, when women represent probably 52% of the population. And so we're really losing half the brains. And I'd like to emphasize that the Y chromosome does not carry the intelligence genes. So I think we need to take advantage of the talent that is in the female part of the society. Now, these are the Nobel Laureates from 1901 to 2020. And I'm going to talk about a few of them, not all of them, because their stories are really quite interesting. Marie Curie and her husband worked together. And when she was awarded the Nobel Prize, there were several males who protested, saying that she was just a drudge who's kind of slopped the chemicals that her husband needed to win the prize. But nevertheless, she persisted and eventually died at an early age, relatively early age, probably because of the radiation that she had been exposed to. She was awarded 2 Nobel Prizes, actually. And the second Nobel Prize was in chemistry, and she remains the only person awarded the prize in 2 categories. And it was her relentless resolve and insatiable curiosity that made her an icon in the world of modern science. She was indefatigable. She just worked all the time, pursuing a career that was physically demanding and ultimately fatal. She discovered polonium and radium, and she championed the use of radiation in medicine and fundamentally changed our understanding of radioactivity. Now, Maria Gopher won the Nobel Prize in 1963. She's a very interesting person. I'm just going to read a bit, which I learned about her that I think is fun to share. Maria Gopher grew up in Germany, was responsible for our modern understanding of the atomic nucleus. She was a beautiful flirt who loved to party and enchanted many of the men around her because she was so much smarter than they were. She fell in love with an American chemist, and some said it was because he had the only convertible in town, and moved with him to the United States, expecting to have a career in physics. For the next 30 years, she worked at 3 American universities, leading universities, as an unpaid volunteer, eventually working her way up to voluntary professor. When she won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1963, her local newspaper headlined, "La Jolla Mother Wins Nobel Prize." And lest anyone think no one would write about a woman scientist that way today, the New York Times obituary for Yvonne Brill, the rocket scientist whose propulsion system kept communication satellites in orbit, what they said about her in the New York Times was, she made a mean beef stroganoff. So one can see what the struggles of women, and I think Barbara McClintock probably epitomizes these struggles, because she worked in a university, and when she asked for time for research, she was refused. And so she moved off to Cold Spring Harbor. And there she was referred to by Watson, of the famous Watson and Crick, as an old bag who was hanging around the labs at Cold Spring Harbor. But that old bag went on to win the Nobel Prize. Now, Rita Levi-Montalcini began her scientific career in danger as a Jew in fascist Italy. But she ended it in triumph as the neuroembryologist who co-discovered the nerve growth factor. She was a prominent figure in Italian politics and a very active researcher and mentor until her death at the age of 103. I was very fortunate in being able to meet Rita Levi-Montalcini. She was a remarkable person. She started her advanced studies in neurology and psychology, but she was kicked out of school when Mussolini had published the 1938 race laws forbidding any non-Aryan from having a professional or academic career. And Levi-Montalcini went to Brussels for a short time to study at a neurological institute, but had to flee when Germany invaded Belgium. In Turin, she built a laboratory in her bedroom, fashioning scalpels from sewing needles, using an ophthalmologist's tiny scissors and a watchmaker's forceps. And with those tools, and inspired by an article she read by embryologist Victor Hamburger, with whom she subsequently did a lot of work, she dissected chick embryos and studied their motor neurons that are responsible for controlling movement. And she did that work under a microscope in her bedroom. Now, I really like Christiane Nusslein-Volhard. She won the Nobel Prize, this was for her work in major understanding of human reproduction. The story about Christiane that I like very much is that when she won the Nobel Prize, she founded a foundation that gives young women scientists grants for household health and childcare. The important thing with her foundation, she said, is to teach women that it's okay to let people help you because you can't do everything yourself. I find that really inspiring, especially in the days of COVID-19, when we now are learning that the heaviest demands and the greatest severest factors have been young women entering careers in science during COVID, unable to go to the laboratory at the same time with very young children and doing homeschooling. Now, the unsung heroes are those who didn't get the Nobel Prize, but deserve them. This is from an article that's in this month's Smithsonian Magazine. And it's about Lonnie Clinton Gordon, who started her science career in working in microbiology and public health. And she spent her time identifying pathogens, and really, she and Pearl Kendrick are responsible for the work that was done to overcome whooping cough. Now, Alice Evans was an American scientist who has a very interesting story because she worked for the Department of Agriculture. And after completing high school, she taught for 4 years before enrolling in a 2-year course for rural teachers at Cornell University in Ithaca. She became interested in science and completed a bachelor's at Cornell and a master's at the University of Wisconsin. She never had a chance to complete her PhD because she ran out of money. But she studied in the Department of Agriculture, Brucella. And she was the one who showed that the Brucella latensis was transmitted through raw milk, but they didn't believe her. And then when she finally, it finally was accepted, they felt that she couldn't have done it. It must have been a man who made the discovery because it was too important for a woman to have made. In recognition of her achievement in 1928, the Society of American Bacteriologists, who were the society which became the American Society of Microbiology, elected Alice Evans as the first woman president. Now, Jocelyn Bell, is a British astronomer who discovered pulsars in 1967, the cosmic sources of peculiar radio pulses. The 1974 Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to Anthony Hewish and Martin Ryle for the discovery of pulsars. Several prominent scientists protested the omission of Bell Burnell. She was very polite and maintained that the prize was presented appropriately because she was only a student in the laboratory of her professor, who was awarded the Nobel Prize. Subsequently, she was awarded the 2021 Copley Medal for her work. Now let's look a little bit at what's been happening to women in science as we come into the 21st century. We find, for example, in mathematics and statistics, the percentage of women progressing from the bachelor's degree to the master's to the doctorate, you can see is almost drops by half. And similarly, for computer sciences, it's really strange that early on, when computers were first being used, women were quite dominant in the field. But as it became more of a tool and a gameplay kind of activity, it became totally covered or completely fielded by men. And you can see that even in the present time, in 2016 is the latest of the data that I've got, you can see that women have not been as a major component of computer science, and similarly in engineering. I think engineering probably is the most difficult for women to become a student or employed in engineering, though that is changing. Physics has tried very hard to increase the number of women, and to their credit, but still it represents a very, very small portion, practically less than 20%. Now, I've been focusing on women, but really when you look at African American, Asian, Hispanic females, the numbers are even lower, and scandalously lower, to be perfectly honest. I'm happy to say that the University of Maryland ranks in the top 10 of U.S. university institutions for recipients of the doctoral degree for African American and science and engineering recipients, both University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and University of Maryland, College Park. The awards globally, which is why it becomes really a very, it's really done here, a very difficult, I wanted to point out the top red line are the numbers of scientists, degrees awarded in China. And you can see that the US numbers are very, very much lower. So we're facing a very highly competitive world, and it really becomes mandatory that we face the problem of equity and diversity in science, engineering, mathematics. Now, there's an interesting story with this quote. A woman scientist at MIT about 20 or 30 years ago needed additional laboratory space, and she went to a department chairman, and he was a Drosophila geneticist, and he asked her what she wanted the space for, and she said, well, she'd heard about this very interesting work with a special species of fish, and she wanted to build an aquarium. And he said he didn't think that was a very good scientific project to work on, which of course was the person that she studied with to win the Nobel Prize. In any case, the woman scientist just decided that she had very little space and she needed this additional laboratory space, and so went around in the dark of the night and measured the space, the lab space that was occupied by the male scientists compared to the lab space occupied by the female scientists. And it turned out to be scandalously much reduced for the women. She brought this to the attention of the then president, the late Charles Vest. And to his credit, he said, I have always believed that contemporary gender discrimination within universities is part reality and part perception. True, but I now understand that reality is by far the greater part of the balance. And he made some dramatic changes. However, when I drafted or charted the changes to the present, it really hasn't changed a whole lot at MIT. Women are still only about less than 20% of the faculty at MIT. What are the problems with women being advanced in careers, whether it's academia or business or the government? And really, there are three major factors that Joan Williams in a study has published. One is the attribution bias. That is, if a woman is successful, it's because she's lucky. Whereas if a man is successful, he's just a darn good worker. And second is, if a woman makes a mistake, it's everybody in the world knows it. But if a man makes a mistake, well, he's just learning. Give him a break. And then the evaluations, high achieving women receive a high evaluation very much less frequently than men. And I think the best example is when the study was done and published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, where the team put together a curriculum vitae. One had a boy's name, and the other had a woman's name. But otherwise, the CV was identical. And it was mailed to a number of scientists around the country. And it, with a request to evaluate the curriculum vitae and then to ascribe a recommended salary. The identical CV under the woman's name was ranked much, much lower. Otherwise identical, but just female name. And the recommended salary was significantly less than for the male named CV. I'd like to tell a story of my own from the American Society for Microbiology. Alice Evans, whom I've already described in her struggles, was the first woman president. And then notice a pattern. In 1928, and then about 10 or 12 years later, a second woman president, Rebecca Craighill Lansfield. Her typing of Streptococcus holds to this day. And the story told was, well, all the men were at war, and therefore we had to elect this woman president. And then another 20 or 30 years, Helen Whiteley. And then for some reason, I was elected president in 1985. What I discovered was that the committee, the past president served as the nominating committee, chair of the nominating committee for the next president, president-elect. And I found that the selection was made in June, and it was published in August in what was the ASM, the American Society of Microbiology newsletter. And it was then that you knew who was being nominated, usually two men. And if you wanted to do a write-in candidate, you had to submit that in June, but this is August. And so what I did was call the chair of the Women's Committee of the ASM and said, look, this was in June when the committee had selected two men for that next year. And I said, if you really want to get another woman president for ASM before another 10 or 20 years, you better go out and get a write-in candidate. They had about a week, and they got about 1,000 signatures. And this is what happened. Jean Brenchley was elected the next year, and you notice the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. And it was because the system was, light was shone on it, and then action could be taken. So the point is that learn what the system is and take advantage of it. The National Academy of Sciences has a committee which I chaired, and we put out a report on sexual harassment of women, and the timing was exquisite. It appeared just at the height of the Me Too movement, and what was really important was that this report had been underway for 3 years. It was a very extensive, very highly documented report, and it appeared just at the time in December, I think 2 years ago, when the Me Too movement was really at its loudest and strongest. So it underpinned the claims of the Me Too movement with data, lots and lots of data. And the data are very illuminating, because what it pointed out was that what I put in my terms is that the harassment ranges from the criminal to the clueless. In other words, the sexual assault or unwanted groping or whatever, it's extreme. But underneath and with all that are the slights and the kinds of slurs that women have to undergo that make it really tough to stay in the lab, to work hard, to continue in your career. And I think this was very helpful, because the findings were that two characteristics most associated with higher rates of sexual harassment are having male-dominated gender ratios. What does that mean? It means that a company, if on its board is diversity and more than one woman, the company makes money. It makes more money. That's been documented. There have been a number of studies. So it's to the benefit to change the male domination to a diversity. And an organizational climate is by far the greatest predictor of the occurrence of sexual harassment. That is, if it's a totally macho, or as my daughter says, testosterone permeated environment, then it makes it very difficult for women to thrive in the environment or even to be appointed to leadership. The study also showed that let me see, that at the University of Texas, they did a very extensive survey, and it was astounding. If you look to the far right, in the School of Medicine, 45% of the female students reported gender harassment, which of course was highly revealing to the university, and I understand some changes have been made. But the findings from the study show that sexual harassment is common in academic science, engineering, and medicine. And the data shows that about 50% of women faculty and staff in academia experience some form of sexual harassment. As one of my colleagues jokes, of 5 women, 3 will say they have been sexually harassed and the other 2 aren't talking. So sexual harassment is common, and the analysis today shows that this is something that really needs to be dealt with. And we have to move beyond using legal compliance, and academic institutions have to go beyond policies or interventions that we depend on an individual making a report. I'd like to also quote from my book again, because I think we can take pride in the University of Maryland, because the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 are the result of Bernice Sandler here at the University of Maryland, working with those who were drafting those laws. And Sandler found a way forward for women like herself by taking federal funds, the University of Maryland, and all research universities receiving federal funding had become a federal contractor. And so, as she said, it was a eureka moment, because it meant that universities fell under the Equal Employment Act and the Civil Rights Act. And that made major changes for women. Now, I'd like to close with a little bit of research. And I'm very glad to see that my wonderful colleague, Dr. Huck, is in the audience, because it's he and I who worked on this together. And that is that we have pursued our research on cholera, the second pandemic in which we are currently which is currently underway, to work on cholera. Now, we have discovered that the bacterium that causes cholera is in the environment. This work was done in the Chesapeake Bay here at the University of Maryland. This was work done starting in 1973 when I first came to Maryland, and previously at Georgetown University, and before that as a graduate student. But we discovered the bacterium is part of the natural environment. We also showed that from the work in the Chesapeake Bay particularly, that it's associated with copepods or plankton, and that these are kind of the giants of the microscopic world, the microbial world, and that if you use a simple filter, you can remove about 90% of the bacteria. And so work that we have done in Bangladesh, training women to filter their water before bringing it to the home for drinking. What we learned, and it didn't take very much to teach them, was that the water that had been filtered, even by that simple filter to the right, to simple filtration, did not carry all of the particulates and the bacteria attached to the particulates that you see on the left. And the important point I want to make is that the success was to use extension agents, training the women who lived in the villages to become extension agents and to go out to the other villages and teach the women how to filter their water. And with that process, we were able to reduce cholera by about 50%. And so some final comments from what I hope might be takeaway from the talk today. This is advice for women, for the underrepresented, whether it's racial underrepresentation, gender, or whatever. Think positively. You can be successful no matter how adverse the conditions and circumstances. And teach yourself what you need to know. And that involves being very, very comfortable with mathematics and computers. And there really are no genes for mathematics on the Y chromosome either. Women are just as good. It's been shown over and over again. And I don't have to make the recommendation here, but in the book, I exhort that women should consider going to graduate school. And obviously, in the audience, you're taking that advice on your own. But men can also help. For the men in the audience, speak up. When you see someone being slurred or insulted or demeaned, speak up. Use humor if you need to. And in fact, I recommend that. I think the response of women or any underrepresented person who's being mistreated, anger doesn't help. I have a bad temper, but I learned soon enough that it doesn't work. It's much better to use humor, to be gracious, and just to make sure that the individual who is carrying out the slur or the unpleasant action understands that, at least that you know, that he or whoever it is behaving badly. And so handle those toxic environments gracefully and take every opportunity offered by technology. This is the 21st century of technology. And then finally, be the public face of science, all of you, men and women, and especially women and the underrepresented minorities. If you're African American, it's very important for you to speak up and speak out, because there are other young African Americans who will see you and you will be a role model and they'll want to be just like you. So I think that is a very strong recommendation that I think is really critical. I published this in Lab of One's Own and also many other stories other than the ones that I've described today. And I'm going to close with the words of John Muir, the founder of Environmental Society. When one tugs at a single thing in nature, he, and then I have inserted and she, finds it hitched to the rest of the universe. And so with that, I would like to close and take questions. Thank you for your attention.